A Pair of Schoolgirls by Angela Brazil. Chapter 1. A School Election.
It was precisely 5 minutes past 11 on the first day of the autumn term, and Avondale College, which for 7 whole weeks had been lonely and deserted, and given over to the tender mercies of paper-hangers, painters, and charwomen, once more presented its wonted aspect of life and bustle. The reopening was a very important event in the opinion of everybody concerned, partly because it marked the beginning of a fresh school year, and partly because the building had been altered and enlarged, many changes made in the curriculum, and many new names added to the already long list in the register. 387 pupils had assembled that morning in the great lecture hall, the largest number on record at the college. 5 additional classes had been formed, and there were 6 extra mistresses. At the 11 o'clock interval the place seemed swarming with girls. They thronged the staircase and passages, filled the pantry, blocked the dressing rooms, and overflowed into the playground and the gymnasium, girls of all sorts and descriptions, from the 10-year-olds who had just come up, rather solemn and overawed, from the preparatory to those elect and superior damsels of 17 who were studying for their matriculation. By the empty stove in the juniors' common room stood 6 betwixt and betweens, whose average age probably worked out at 14 1/4, though Mavi Morris was a giantess compared with little Ruth Harmon. The 6 heads were bent together in closest proximity, and the 6 tongues were particularly active, for after the long summer holidays there was such a vast amount to talk about that it seemed almost impossible to discuss all the interesting items of news with sufficient rapidity. "The old coal looks no end," said Grace Russell. "It's so smart and spanky now, one hardly knows it. Pictures in the classrooms, flowers on the chimneypieces, a stained glass window in the lecture hall, busts on brackets all along the corridor wall, and the studio floor polished. Every single place has been done up from top to bottom. I'd like it better if it didn't smell so abominably of new paint," objected Noel Kennedy. "When I opened the studio door, the varnish stuck to my fingers. However, the school certainly looks much nicer. Why, even the book cupboard has been repapered." "That's because you splashed ink on the wall last term. Don't you remember how fearfully cross Miss Hardy was about it?" "Rather. She insisted that I'd done it on purpose, and couldn't and wouldn't believe it was an accident." "Well, thank goodness we've done with her. I'm glad teachers don't move up with their forms. I'm of the opposite opinion to Hamlet, and I'd rather face the evils that I don't know than those I do. Miss Pittman can't possibly be any worse, and she may chance to be better. I say, it's rather a joke our being in the upper 4th now, isn't it?" remarked Ruth Harmon. "I'm glad we've all gone up together," said Dorothy Greenfield. "There's only Marjorie Poulton left behind, and she won't be missed. We're exactly the same old set, with the addition of a few you girls." "Do you realize," said Mavi Morris, that we're the top class in the lower school now, and that one of us will be chosen warden? There'll be an election this afternoon. Why, so there will. What a frantic excitement. We shall all have to canvass in the dinner hour. I wonder if Miss Tempest has put up the list of candidates yet? I vote we go to the notice board and see. There's just time before the bell rings. Off scrambled the girls at once, pushing and jostling one another in their eagerness to get to the lecture hall. There was a crowd collected round the notice board, but they elbowed their way to the front notwithstanding. Yes, the list was there, in the headmistress's own handwriting, and they scanned it with varying comments of joy or disappointment, according as their names were present or absent. Hurrah! Disgusting! No luck for me. I don't call it fair. You're on, Dorothy Greenfield, and so am I. Say, girls, which of you'll promise to vote for me? Avondale College was a large day school. Its pupils were drawn from all parts of Coalminster and the surrounding district, many coming in by train or tramcar, and some on bicycles. Under the headmistress-ship of Miss Tempest its numbers had increased so rapidly that extra accommodation had become necessary, and not only had the lecture hall and dressing rooms been enlarged, but an entire new wing had been added to the building. Avondale prided itself greatly upon its institutions. It is not always easy for a day school to have the same corporate life as a boarding school, but Miss Tempest, in spite of this difficulty, had managed to inaugurate a spirit of union among her pupils, and to make them work together for the general good of the community. She wished the college to be, not merely a place where textbooks were studied, but a central point of light on every possible subject. She encouraged the girls to have many interests outside the ordinary round of lessons, and by the help of various self-governing societies to learn to be good citizens, and to play an intelligent and active part in the progress of the world. A nature study union, a guild of arts and crafts, a debating club, a dramatic circle, and a school magazine all flourished at Avondale. The direction of these societies was in the hands of a select committee chosen from the 5th and 6th forms, but in order that the younger girls might be represented, a member of the upper 4th was elected each year as warden of the lower school, and was privileged to attend some of the meetings, and to speak on behalf of the interests of the juniors. Naturally, this post was an exceedingly coveted honor. The girl who held it became the delegate and mouthpiece of the lower forms, an acknowledged authority, and the general leader of the rest. It was the custom to elect the warden by ballot on the afternoon of the reopening day. 6 candidates were selected by Miss Tempest, and these were voted for by the members of the several divisions of the 3rd and 4th forms. Among the 6 chosen for this election, none was more excited about her possible chances than Dorothy Greenfield, and as our story centers round her and her doings, she merits a few words of description. She was a tall, slim, rather out of the common-looking girl, and though at present she was passing through the ugly duckling stage, she had several good points, which might develop into beauty later on. Her large dark grey eyes, with their straight, well-marked brows, made you forgive her nondescript nose. She lacked colour, certainly, but her complexion was clear, and, despite her rather thin cheeks, the outline of her face was decidedly pleasing. Her mouth was neat and firm, and her chin square, and she had a quantity of wavy, fluffy brown hair that had an obstreperous way of escaping from its ribbon and hanging over her ears. During the past 6 months Dorothy had shot up like Jack's beanstalk, and she was still growing fast, an awkward process, which involved a certain angularity of both body and mind. She was apt to do things by fits and starts, she formed hot attachments or took violent prejudices, she was amiable or irritable according to her mood, and though capable of making herself most attractive, could flash out with a sharp retort if anybody offended her. She had a favourable report in the school, she was generally among those marked excellent in her form, and she was above the average at hockey and tennis, had played a piano solo at the annual concert, won highly commended at the Arts and Crafts exhibition, and contributed an article to the school magazine. Possessing such a good all-round record, therefore, Dorothy might have as reasonable a possibility of success as anybody else at the coming election, and she could not help letting her hopes run high. The ballot was to be taken at 3:30, which left little time for canvassing, but she meant to do the best for herself that circumstances would allow. She was a day boarder, so, when morning classes were over, she strolled into the juniors' common room to discuss her chances. Already some papers were pinned up claiming attention for the various candidates. Vote for Val Barnett, the hockey champion. Hope Lawson begs all her friends to support her in the coming election. Grace Russell solicits the favor of your votes. Noel Kennedy relies upon the kindness of the lower school. "Hello, Dorothy," said Mavi Morris. "Aren't you going to add your quota to the general lot? All the others are getting up their appeals. I wish Miss Tempest had put me on the list of likelies." "I can't think why she didn't," replied Dorothy. "I should say you're far more suitable than Noel Kennedy." "Why, so do I, naturally. But there. It can't be helped. I'm not among the elect, so I must just grin and bear it. Is this your appeal? Let me look." She seized the piece of paper from Dorothy's hand, and, scanning it eagerly, read the following lines. "Ye voters at the school election, I beg you'll look in my direction. I hate to boast and brag, but yet, for once I'm blowing my own trumpet. Now don't you think in me you'd find a candidate suited to your mind? No bookworm, but fond of sports, hockey or games of other sorts. At acting I can run the show, and play my part, as well you know. At meetings all your wants I'd state, and make a speech at the debate. I'd back in all scholastic storms. the interests of the lower forms. A zealous leader I should be. So when you vote, please remember me. I hope these verses you will pardon. And choose me for the lower school warden. What do you think of it? Asked Dorothy. I made it up during the history lesson, and wrote it on my knee under the desk. One wants something rather different from other people's, and I thought perhaps no one else would have a rhyming address. It's not bad, commented Mavi, but you do brag. I've apologized for it. One must state one's qualifications, or what's the use of being a candidate? Look at Val's notice, she calls herself the hockey champion. No one takes Val too seriously. I don't believe she's the ghost of a chance, though she did win the cup last season. One needs more than that for a warden, brains count as well as muscles. I know, that's why I tried poetry. Please don't call that stuff poetry. Half of the lines won't scan. There was a pucker between Dorothy's dark eyebrows as she snatched back her literary bantling. I don't suppose that matters. Everybody isn't so hypocritical, she retorted. Shall I pin it up here or in the gym? It will be more seen here, but I warn you, Dorothy, I don't think the girls will like it. Why not? Well, it's clever enough, but it's cheeky. I'm afraid somehow T won't catch on. If you take my advice, you'll tear it up and just write vote for Dorothy Greenfield instead. But taking other people's advice was not at present included in Dorothy's scheme of existence. She much preferred her own ideas, however crude. I'll leave it as it is, she answered loftily. It can't fail to attract attention anyhow. As you like. By the by, if you're going round canvassing, there's been a new __. But Dorothy did not wait to listen. She was annoyed at Mavi's scant appreciation of her poetic effort, and having manifested her independence by pinning the offending verses on the notice board, she stalked away, trying to look nonchalant. She was determined to use every means at hand to ensure success, and her best plan seemed to be to go round personally soliciting votes. I'll tackle the dinner girls now, she thought, and I expect there'll be just time to catch the others when they come back in the afternoon. Thank goodness the election is only among the third and fourth. It would be terrible if one had to go all round the school. Why, I never asked Mavi. How stupid! But she's certain to be on my side. She detests Val, and she's not particularly fond of Hope either, though of course there's Grace. Had I better go back and make sure of her? On the whole, she decided that as she had left Mavi in rather a high and mighty manner, it would seem a little beneath her dignity to return at once and beg a favour, so she went into the playground instead to beat up possible electors. She was not the first in the field, by any means. Already Valentine Barnett and her satellites were hard at work coaxing and wheedling, While the emissaries of Doris Earnshaw and Noel Kennedy were urging the qualifications of their particular favourites. Hope Lawson was seated on the seesaw in company with a number of small girls from her lower second. "What's she doing that for?" thought Dorothy. "Those kids haven't got votes. It's sheer waste of time to bother with them." She's actually put her arm round that odious little Maggie Muir, and taken Nell Borton on her knee. I shouldn't care to make myself so cheap. I suppose she's letting Blanche Hall and Irene Jackson do her canvassing for her. Dorothy was, however, too much occupied with her own affairs to concern herself greatly about her neighbours' movements. To put her claims adequately before each separate elector was no mean task, and time fled all too quickly. She used what powers of persuasion she possessed, and flattered herself that she had made an impression in some quarters, but very few of the girls would give any definite promises. Many of them, especially those of the middle and lower thirds, seemed to enjoy the importance of owning something which it was in their power to withhold. "I'm waiting till I've heard what you all six have to say for yourselves," said Kitty Palgrave condescendingly. "I shan't make up my mind until the very last minute." "It's so difficult to choose between you," added Ellie Simpson, a pert little person of 12. Their tone verged on the offensive, and in any other circumstances Dorothy would have administered a snub. As it was, she pocketed her pride, and merely said she hoped they would remember her. She heard them snigger as she turned away, and longed to go back and shake them, but discretion prevailed. "One has to put up with this sort of thing if one wants to get returned warden," she reflected. "All the same, it's sickening to be obliged to truckle to young idiots like that." She had not by any means found all the possible voters, so she decided to return to the juniors' common room. Mavi had gone, but a number of other girls stood near the notice board talking, and reading the appeals of the various candidates. Dorothy strolled up to see how her verses were being received. They made a different impression on different minds, to judge from her comments that met her ears. "It's ripping," exclaimed Bertha Warren. "Says she can run the show, does she?" sneered Joyce Hickson. "I call it just lovely," gushed Addie Parker. "Her trumpeter's dead, certainly," giggled Phyllis Fowler. "Hello, Dorothy. I didn't see you were there." "I'm going to vote for you," Dorothy said. "Bertha, and so is Addie. Phyllis has promised Hope, and Joyce is on Val's side. If you like, I'll canvass for you here, while you do the gym. You'd better not waste any time, because the others are hard at it, and it's best to get first innings if you can." Dorothy hastily agreed, and hurried off to the gymnasium, where she was fortunate enough to catch some of her own classmates. They were all sucking enormous peppermint humbugs, and were almost speechless in consequence, but they had the politeness to listen to her, which was more than she had experienced from some of the girls. "Very sorry," replied Annie Gray, talking with difficulty. "You should have asked us sooner." Val's been round, and simply coerced us. She made it a hockey versus lacrosse contest, and of course we plumped for hockey, murmured Elsie Bellamy. Val's simply ripping at hockey. Is that all you care for? Exclaimed Dorothy scornfully. Val has nothing else to recommend her. Hasn't she? What about peppermint humbugs? I call them a very substantial recommendation. Did Val give you those? Rather. She put on her hat and bolted out into High Street and bought a whole pound. Lucky Miss James didn't catch her as she dodged back. She's handing them round to everybody, added Helen Walker. I wish I had taken two. For once Dorothy's pale cheeks put on a colour. She could not restrain her indignation. How atrociously and abominably mean, she burst out. Why, it's just bribery, pure and simple. I didn't think Val was capable of such a sneaking trick. She knows quite well how unfair it is to the rest of us. Why, you could have done the same if you'd liked, laughed Elsie. It's not too late now. I've a preference for caramels, if you ask me. I'd be ashamed, declared Dorothy. Surely you ought to give your votes on better grounds than humbugs or caramels. Such a thing has never been done before at the Cole. All the more loss for us, giggled Helen flippantly. Do you mean to tell me you don't care whether a candidate behaves dishonorably or not? Not I, if she's jolly. I'm disgusted with you, absolutely disgusted. If you haven't a higher ideal of what's required in a warden, you don't deserve to have votes at all. Draw tea mild, Dorothy, chirped Elsie. I won't. I'll tell you what I think of you, you're a set of greedy things. There isn't one of you with a spark of public spirit, and if the election is going to be run on these lines, But Dorothy's tirade was interrupted by the dinner bell, and the objects of her scorn, hastily swallowing the offending peppermints, decamped at a run, leaving her to address a group of empty chairs. She followed more leisurely, fuming as she went. She knew she had been foolish and most undiplomatic to lose her temper so utterly, but the words had rushed out before she could stop them. They wouldn't have voted for me in any case, she said to herself, so it really doesn't matter, after all, they are only a minority. I expect it will prove a very even affair, perhaps a draw, and that no one will have a complete walk over.